everybody, and welcome to our live stream of our Subverting Gender Norms panel. I am here with some of my favorite non-binary authors so that we can talk all things gender and our books and just generally being like non-binary and like living in this world that that's fun. So so let's start with some introductions. I'm Emery Lee, author of Meet Cute Diary. Why did I grab the arc when I have it? Diary, a YA trans rom-com about a trans boy, his romance blog, and the fake relationship that he stages in order to save the blog from an internet troll. And that book came out yesterday, so you can now actually go and get a copy like anywhere. So you should totally do that. And to my lovely guests, whoever wants to go first.
We can do alphabetical. Leave it up to fate. I'll just go first. I'm Mason Deaver. I'm the author of I Wish You All the Best, which came out in 2019, and also the upcoming The Ghosts We Keep. I have a nice, pretty finished copy here that's beautiful. You can pre-order that now anywhere books are sold. You can get signed copies from Quail Ridge Books. And yeah, whoever wants to go next.
Sure, I'll go. Hi, I am Anna-Marie McLemore. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the author of many queer Latinx non-binary fairy tales, most recently Dark and Deepest Red, which was nicknamed Medieval Queers, and The Mirror Season, which was the book that Dahlia Adler said was so queer, even its dulce was pan. So this is my pansexual book. I am so excited to be here. I'm so excited you will see me wave the sparkly wand about many things, including your release. Felicidades.
Thank you.
Yay. I guess that leaves me. I'm Ray Stoeve, they, them. I am the author of Between Perfect and Real, which just came out last week. I don't know, time is very... and I also contributed to Take the Mic, Fictional Stories of Everyday Resistance. And I'm super excited to be here because I love all of your books.
Yeah, like, of course, when gathering a non-binary panel, I had to choose the non-binary powerhouses that I love and adore. So this is what this is the level of chaos that I brought. I hope you're all excited. Because we have a really, some really fun conversations coming up tonight. So I want to thank you all for coming and let you know that if you have any questions that you would like for any of us to answer, you can go ahead and leave them in the comments and we will kind of roll them into our conversation as we go. So definitely leave questions. We love to have them and we will move on to the discussion. So the first thing I want to talk about is how, of course, when it comes to like subverting gender norms, we tend to talk about things like gender roles and like traditional gender roles and how we can kind of like deconstruct those. But just being, trans and non-binary, you're looking at an entirely different like world of things than a lot of people who are cis might be like referring to. And so I kind of want to talk about how like each of you go about like deconstructing like what is gender normativity in your own work.
Yeah, I can hop on that first. I think about this a lot. And I think like the biggest thing for me with Between Perfect and Real was constructing a narrative that felt authentic for me as a trans person and to the trans people that I know and love, and not thinking about whether or not it was going to be palatable to cis people. And so for me, that meant like really honoring like the messiness and the nuance and the exploration and the uncertainty and like not trying to fit Dean into kind of the simplified narrative of I've always known and I was born this and I want to transition to this, and just kind of like give my trans characters a lot of space to just be like have individual experiences and not like a mainstream narrative.
I think my experience with this came from the fact that I was writing I Wish You All the Best as I was figuring things out pretty actively. My joke about that book is that I did I made Ben have certain, or like behave a certain way, or have certain thoughts about themselves, because that would then lead me to research things that were actually thoughts I probably had about myself. And oh, well, now I have the answer, and I only did it because of the book or whatever. But so much of what I was trying to unpack came from the things that I was seeing as I was doing my research. This very stereotypical idea almost of what like non-binary is supposed to look like, or what trans people are supposed to look like. And I wanted to, because like I very much don't fit that mold, especially in my own eyes. And so I really wanted to like sort of figure that out and unpack it, and that's what I used I Wish Y'all the Best for. And then when it came time for The Ghost We Keep, I decided that I wrote my coming out narrative and that I didn't want to do that again. And so throughout the book, Liam is just a non-binary teenager who knows that he is non-binary. He knows the pronouns that he uses. They're very comfortable in most cases and still experience dysphoria. Like, the transness is not central to the book, and that was a very important, like, purposeful thing that I wanted to do.
So I think a lot of what I end up doing both in fiction and in life is sort of the like, can you do that? Like, is that allowed process? This really started, like, I've been writing trans characters for a while. I've been writing trans and non-binary characters for a while, but I think me really thinking about this deeply started with writing Paige Ashby in Blanca y Roja, which is my queer Latinx Snow White and Rose Red meets Swan Lake. And this is a character who uses he, him pronouns and she, her pronouns, but strongly identifies as a boy. And I kind of thought, like, can I do this? Like, it's the process of like seeing if you can get away with something as a writer, like especially like being a Latinx writer. I'm like, let's see what happens if I do this. Like, if I bring these like identities together and see what happens. And as I was writing that, I think I was thinking more deeply about my gender than I really wanted to think that I was, because I did not realize at that point. I did not realize until the production process for Dark and Deepest Red. I really should have realized. Like, looking back, it's one of those things where I think it happens with gender identity. I think it happens with queerness, where you're like, how did I miss that? Oh, that's right. I actively wanted to miss that. Like, it's kind of a self-protection mechanism, which will be like my like, I just want to say, like, if you're in that space like that, or if it takes you a while, like, that's nothing to be ashamed of. Like, our journeys are our journeys. They take a while and our identities evolve. And this happens. I forget what I was originally saying. I'm going to come back to it in a minute. It's going to come back. Okay. Yeah. I know how it's coming back now. Okay. So the book I'm working on now it's called Lake Lore. It comes out in March of 2022. And I'm writing about two characters who use the same pronouns. They both use they, them, but they have very different conceptions of their genders. One of them is much more strongly masculine identified, and one of them has a much wider spectrum of how they move within gender presentation. But they have common references that they understand. They have this sort of common language. And also writing about that at the same time as writing about being Mexican American, about being Latinx. You can't not think about colonization and the act of decolonization. And I love a lot of things about Spanish. I grew up around Spanish, but it's a very, very gendered language, and it's gendered in a way that a lot of indigenous languages are not. So this was something that meant a lot to me, to like go deeper into the fact that, like, okay, you have these grammar systems, but you also have heritage in systems that saw it differently and that did not gender names the way Spanish does. So a lot of this intersectional work, like, it's gotten me to think about my own identity. And I think that's so much of what you end up doing in fiction. Even if a character is not you, I think that's so much of what you end up doing in fiction, which is why I'm just like, I'm so grateful for books that I get to read and like see myself in, see my friends in, because like someone had to give their heart to that book for you to be able to have that experience.
That's very, very true. I feel that a lot. And like, I feel like for my book, it ended up being, because Noah is a binary trans boy, but I really knew, like, going into it that I was like, I didn't want him to read, like, a trans guy who's trying so hard to be cis that, like, he normalizes some of the toxic elements of like being a man. And so I feel like, yes, I feel like it was very much like an exploration of like his being trans, but he says things throughout the book like, I still love the color pink. Like, the color pink is amazing. Why wouldn't you love it? And like, and just kind of like, it's okay to like these things that like are girl things. Like, they're not really girl things. Like, you're allowed to like what you like, and you're allowed to engage with the things you engage with. And like, it was very like, keeping in mind, like, even though he is a binary, like, trans guy, and he is a guy, and he insists, like, he reiterates that multiple times throughout the story, like, I am a man. Like, I know that I'm a man. But like, that doesn't mean that like he has to behave in like these really like rigid like masculine gender norms. Whereas on the other hand, like I have like Devin, who's non-binary and kind of like explores like all these different pronoun sets throughout the course of the book. But like for Devin, it's kind of like Devin says, I'm like 2% boy, and like I feel like that like is kind of like a running gag throughout the book. But it's just like, the idea of like there's a little bit of boy in there somewhere, but like the rest is kind of like that's fine. And like, so I feel like it's just kind of the idea of like, you can jump through your gender, you can change it as many times as you want, you can kind of just like, and even if you're comfortable with your gender, you can explore how you engage with gender and like the things that you do to express that gender. It doesn't have to be like a super like rigid one way kind of thing. So I feel like that was like really important for me, just because like that was how my gender journey kind of went. Was like at first I was like, well, I can't be a trans guy because I'm not, super hyper masculine stereotype. And then I was like, well, maybe I'm a little bit of a boy. Maybe I'm a little more of a boy. Maybe I'm actually really a boy. We'll get there. And I think that's like, I feel like it's great, like, like Anna Marie was saying, like, just to see more people showing like these stories, like their reality and like their experience of like transness and like non-binariness. Because I feel like the more you see other people saying like, I can do this, the more you're like, oh, I can do that too then. Like, that's so cool. Okay, so we have our first question. So I'm just going to transition right over to that one. And that is, are there some deleted scenes from your books that you guys wanted to include? Anybody got any deleted scenes?
I have one that I can recall right off the bat. There were none from I Wish You All the Best, I think, but in the Ghost We Keep, there was a chapter that I really liked where it was just the three, like the main trio, are younger than they are throughout the rest of the book, probably like 14. And Liam's friend Joel, who was a trans boy, has decided that he wants to like cut off his hair, and they try and give Joel a haircut in the bathroom, and they're 14-year-olds with scissors, so it goes awfully. And it was this moment that I really liked and I really miss, because like Joel's mom comes home in the middle of it and they have this entire conversation, because Joel is Vietnamese. He has this entire conversation with his mom that Vanessa and Liam are not privy to because they can't understand. And the translations that I used, because my Vietnamese friend helped me write them, basically was just like, I don't want this hair, like I don't want it. And the mom, like, I just thought it was like a really nice moment, because the mom like tells Liam and Joel or Liam and Vanessa to get out of the bathroom, go sit in the living room, they're in trouble, but like stays with Joel and like cuts his hair short and makes it look as best as she can with, like how it was torn apart by arts and crafts scissors. And I remember getting my edit letter back from my editor, or like the manuscript, and just that entire scene was gone. And I just felt like, and it makes sense, it didn't further the story, like it was just a scene of early friendship between three people. I was like, I like that scene a lot, and it hurts to see that it's not there.
I feel like that like Mulan like dramatic cutting off the hair thing.
Exactly. That's probably what they thought they were doing. As they destroyed like Joel's hair. Poor kid.
That's like, I just feel like that's such like an iconic moment though. Like,
right?
like for trans people like that dramatic, like, oh, I'm trans.
Yeah.
Like,
like I think I'm just gonna have to like go back and find it and put it in like a newsletter drop or something, because like I really like that scene, and I so badly want it. Like, I know it doesn't further the story, but does everything have to further the story, David? Can we just not have vibes for 50 pages? Like, I know it's costing you money to print out those vibes, but you know, what are we doing here?
Does anybody else have any deleted scenes? I don't think I actually deleted any actual full scenes from my book. I think it was just like cut lines. And mine was like, I remember it was just very like, and it's partially because my book was so short when I first drafted it, but it was just very like, can you add this? Can you add that? And I'm like, yeah, I can add stuff. But
You have added scenes.
added scenes. Like,
I did a full chronological rewrite of my book at one point, which was the version that sold. So it originally took place over the course of the whole senior year, but Lauren and I decided to fit it all into the span of the play to kind of have like an external like force or like clock that was ticking. And so there was like an entire half of the year that just was like gone, including, and I don't regret it. It was all in service of the book, as they say, like, you know, moving the story forward. But there was a really cute prom scene. So between all the characters and yeah, so maybe I'll take a page out of your book, Mason, and put it in a newsletter or something.
I don't know about scenes I wanted to include, but I throw out entire drafts and start over. And the one that's really like sticking in my brain right now is the disaster that happened when I tried to write a really white, straight, cis book. It was just so awful. And luckily my editor eventually like got me to the point where I wrote the book where I wanted to write, which became this book, When the Moon Was Ours, which is a pretty not white, not straight, not cis book. But like, that's just, please, like, if you, I pass on this wisdom to save other writers time. Do not write the book that you don't want to write because you think it needs to be white and straight and cis. Mine was not like, I'm glad it's gone. I'm glad it's gone so that I got to like get to this point of being like, you know what, I'm going to write the stories that I want to write. I'm going to write stories from the communities I'm part of, the communities I love.
I feel like that's like the rule to like every marginalized author. Like, as you're starting out, like, please don't feel like you have to not make your characters marginalized, because like we all do it and we regret it. It just sucks. Like, please save yourself the trouble. Like, okay, so let's go to the next question. Have you gotten any feedback from trans or non-binary readers about how your work has impacted them, and is there any that you can share? And what does that kind of feedback mean to you?
I get letters from readers telling me that especially non-binary characters like Paige, like Babe Breyer, that my characters get them to like think about their gender identity and think like, oh, maybe I'm not quite as cis as I thought, which I'm floored every time. Like, I'm incredibly honored that my stories get to be a small part of anyone's gender journey. And like this was at a point where I started getting these letters at a point where like I didn't know this about myself, and like it touched me in a way that I think would be touching to me even if I was cis. But I also like had feelings where I was like, yes, I'm so happy for you, in a way that I didn't totally understand. Like, this was my community, and it's a wonderful community. Like, look at everyone here. Like, it's a community that I'm really grateful to be part of.
I did a very bad heart.
I know, I do that too. I'm always like, what?
Realizing my webcam is more up than I think that it is. No, it's like I feel like I get emails on the weekly from readers who are either just discovering the book or like just discovering that I have a contact form, and just like hearing readers gush about like what the book and what the character of Ben means to them, it's a bit of this like weird double-edged sword. Because like it makes me feel so elated. It makes me feel like I've done my job as a writer. I did the thing that I set out to do, and like anything from this point on is just like icing on the cake. But then it can be so scary because like you've had an impact on a stranger's life in a way that you cannot control, and it might just be like my anxiety spiking at like the idea of that. But I think about that and I'm like, I am a 25-year-old young like adult, I guess at this point, living in a studio apartment who spends their day just like writing and watching anime, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this responsibility. And it's like obviously there's not really a responsibility. Like it's not as if the person's asking you to like validate them. It's just they're telling you that your work impacted them. But it's still a very scary thing for, I think, I would guess like all four of us, given that you like, I don't know, I've never met a fully like mentally well creator. It's like there's always something going on up here. And so yeah, it's good and it's bad. The good outweighs the bad, thankfully, for the most part.
Yeah, I feel that kind of like the feeling of other people's perceptions or expectations of you growing is something that gives me a lot of anxiety too.
Like I would rather just not be perceived. Like, can we arrange that? Like, I don't exist. I'm not real.
Yes, my release day was just like a complete day of anxiety for me because I just felt so exposed, and like I put so much of myself and my like love and heart and like everything into this book for 5 years, and then to have it out there is just like can be really overwhelming. And it's also been like really meaningful, especially when I hear from trans people, and just like how it's affected them. And particularly this morning, waking up, Alina Vega had posted their review or like their thoughts, and I had been getting little like DMs from them and H.E. Edgemont like all weekend as they were like reading the book, and it just like it's interesting because it feels like you write something that helps other people feel seen, which is like all that I ever want, and then their reaction to it can really make me feel seen too. That like I was trying to communicate something with this book, and you heard the communication. And it just feels really, it's like a totally indescribable, anxiety-inducing, elating feeling, like just like you're saying, Mason. It's like, oh God, don't look at me.
I feel like for me, I don't really get like the like anxiety feeling, but I do get kind of like this, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's like this just like feeling of like, I know I'm gonna let somebody down. Like I know that somebody right now is like because I have gotten a lot of messages from trans readers, which is wild because my book came out yesterday. But I have gotten a lot of messages from people where they'll say something like, I've never seen my pronouns in a book before. Or like, I've never seen, like I had a couple people who were like, multiracial trans people of color. And they were like, I've never seen a book that like, does that. And I was just like, like that's so like wild to be like, somebody's like first experience of seeing themselves like in a book. But then it's also like, I feel like there's so many, like I've gotten like praise that I'm like, that's inhumanly like good praise. Like there is no way I can live up to the expectations where people are like you're saving the trans community. And I'm like, oh God, like like I don't know that I can do that. But I appreciate the praise. But yeah, I do feel like there's like it's like that double-edged sword where you're like, I'm so glad that I'm reaching people. I'm so glad that like it's helping people through their journey, that it's helping them feel seen, that it like, because I remember that feeling like as a kid being like, I don't exist in media, sucks. So like to be able to like combat that for somebody and to make them feel like they're like allowed to exist in stories and that they're allowed to like, find that happily ever after. Like that was like the whole point of like this book. So I'm really glad that it does that for them. But it does also like sometimes reach a point where I'm like, y'all know that like I'm a person, right? Like, and I'm like, not like I definitely wouldn't call myself like a hero or like, like Mason said, like I'm a 25-year-old living in an apartment where I, watch anime and, eat junk food all day. Like I'm not what I would consider a role model. So it's kind of like, I hope y'all aren't feeling a little too highly of me because I don't want to disappoint you all in a couple weeks when you're like, oh, you're kind of a loser. I'm like, yeah, yeah. So we have another question. Are there any characters in your books that are based off of loved ones? I know I have mentioned a couple times in my book that Noah's older brother is actually largely inspired by my sister. And I kind of created that like sibling dynamic based off like our like super like, aggressive dragging each other sibling dynamic. So that's probably like the closest I really get. I don't usually like to base characters like directly off of anybody that I know, but I do sometimes pull like those kind of like dynamics. But now I'm curious about all of you. Like, do you have anyone based off of a loved one?
I think I probably have too many characters that are based off people in my real life. Which I think is just the cost of being an author, a writer. Like, there's only so many people in our head. So at a point we have to start basing them off of traits that we know from real people, and like, oh, why not sprinkle something else in there? Like I think that The Ghost We Keep is probably my book most closely related to this, and like almost sort of like a direct retelling of experiences in a way, because there are so many characters in that book that are just straight up based off of family members. There are relationships that I feels like I copied and pasted sometimes. I mean, down to details. There's a piano in the book that is at Liam's grandmother's house and like Liam's a musician, and so having this piano that's like so out of tune and barely works is like it's just a piano, but like it's taken directly from my great grandmother's house, where there is this very old piano that has been there since I can even remember, and it's horribly broken and out of tune now, and is used for like seating during Christmas time. Like, and so like there's so much that I think that we take from our real lives even without meaning to, and I think that's just kind of the cost of what we do.
So I have a couple instances that are coming to mind. One of them is from Mirror Season. It's not so much that Siena's mother is my mother, but like there are little pieces of my mother in Siena's mom. Like there's a line that was like direct quote from my mother, and I was like, hey, just so you know, your quote is going to be in my book. Like I think it was whatever the question, red lipstick is the answer, which is like one of my things when I'm a girl, not so much when I'm a boy, but it's one of the things that stuck with me. It's like we hold on to these little things, like when we're going through things that are difficult. And I was like, okay, that's something that's going to go in there. Cause like those things that my mom tells me, like those are little things that she just throws off, but that I really hear and that stick with me. And they're like, okay, like I'm going to remember that. The other one I'm thinking of, do I have this book here? And can I get it without knocking over all the books? We're going to find out. The answer was no for anyone who heard the books just tumble down. But in this book, Wild Beauty, the cousins, just like this, they're all Latina, they're all queer. Not all of my cousins are queer, so I'll say that. But it was very much based on, it wasn't so much like you are this cousin, like you're this cousin, but like they're together, like sort of the dynamic of like me and my primas, like how we were growing up, and this sort of like the squabbling and like I'm right, no, I'm right, but like when anyone comes against us, like we're just together, like you're not going to come between us. And we have these common references, we have this history together. So it was sort of more like us as a group rather than I'm gonna make you this character, I'm gonna make you this character. But there was a lot of my primas in the No Malvidas cousins.
I don't think I have anybody who's directly based on anyone in any of my books so far. In my adult work is kind of like a different matter. I'm working on an adult manuscript right now, but I feel like I put like little bits and pieces sometimes of like people that I've known. But specifically, thinking about what you're saying, Anna Marie, about like the feeling or the dynamic of like everyone being together. There's a scene in BPAR at a queer purple house, and I lived in a queer purple house that was like an intentional community for a long time, up until September of this year, or last year, I guess. And that like the people in that scene are not based on any of my housemates, but that feeling, like the layout of the house itself and the feeling of like chosen family and all being together for dinner and like all that stuff is definitely drawn from that experience. But no actual characters so far, unless I want revenge on someone.
Okay, sweet. So our next question is about trans and non-binary YA as a whole. So obviously that has grown and expanded a lot, especially I feel like in the last couple of years, we've just had like this influx of like new trans and non-binary authors. So what thoughts do you have about how far it's come and as to like where it's going?
I can go first, or I think that I remember back, in the before times, like when book events were an actual thing. I used to always have this feeling that, or this answer that I would give when I was asked this at book events, is that we're always, every single day, we're further than we've ever been, but there's still like so much more to do. And the sad part is that 2 years later, it still feels that way, but maybe the answer there is like, there's always going to be more work to do. But like over 2020, 2021, we have seen and are going to see so many like amazing trans stories get told, and some of them for the first time, especially in YA, but there's still such a shortage of Latinx trans characters, disabled trans characters, Black trans characters, like intersectionalities of identity with transness. And so it always feels good to see how far we've been able to come, but we still need to we still need to like look for what we can still be doing, I think.
Yeah, I'll echo that, especially with intersectionality. It's something I'm so grateful every time I see it, and we're getting more of it, and it makes me so happy that these books are on shelves. And we also have a long way to go with intersectionality. Like, this is where my math brain kicks in, and you start thinking about just the different identities that exist, the different intersections of identities that exist. And if you just think about like the math of it, how many more stories need to be told, just because we need more of our stories on shelves, and also just how many more identities and intersecting of identities we need, so that readers can feel that they're on shelves, that their experiences in some way are on shelves.
Yeah, definitely agreed with everything. And I think that like a growth point for maybe YA as a whole, or the industry, is making it accessible to writers from those backgrounds too, because like I'm not trying to take up anybody's spot. And also like characters deserve to be center stage and protagonists, like written by people from those experiences. And I don't know, I'm very aware of how many books there are at all times because of the master list that I keep. And so now I think we're at like 115 something, at least as far as I've been able to track. I'm sure there are more that I haven't gotten. And I am looking forward to the day when there's so many that I'm like, well, okay, I can't do this anymore. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with all of you. Like, I feel like definitely feel on the intersectional front that sometimes it feels like publishers are like, well, we have the one, and it's like, are you considering how many different ways this changes when you bring in like these other identities? So yeah, I feel like that's definitely like huge. And I also feel like something that I think about a lot is just like how we are allowed to like go into other genres and like approach certain like topics and themes. Like I do feel like for a lot of trans authors, we sometimes get like pigeonholed into like kind of serious contemporary leaning like books. And it's like, let us write everything. Like I want to see us in horror. I want to see us in like, you know, romance and comedy and like everything. And I feel like, you know, and I definitely feel like that's something that's started to branch out and like broaden a bit like recently. Because I feel like, you know, 10 years ago, it was like every trans book is just an issue book. Like there's like a handful of trans books, they're all just issue books. And now I feel like, you know, it's like, okay, well, we have, you know, the occasional romance here and we've got a little bit of fantasy over there. But like, I would definitely like to see more of us like in like every genre and every like category and like, and definitely with like that intersectionality thing. Because the important stuff that, sometimes slips through the cracks and you're like, y'all about that, like, get on it. Like, I need that. So we're all very open as far as like our gender and like our gender journeys. I know we all kind of talk about that publicly and we share it like in our books and like in discussions about like our work. So I wanted to ask how you feel your relationship with your gender and with like gender in general and like the exploration of gender has impacted the work that you write and how you feel that that also impacts the way that you engage with readers.
I think sort of coming out like as trans and non-binary, like I have recently, like it's been a very joyful experience, but it's also been a very scary experience because it's made me feel very exposed, even though like the majority of like what I get back is so like it's so affirming, it's so loving. But I also like it's a little bit scary because you one, it just inherently kind of is, and two, you always have those people who are gonna say things. That's all the space I'm gonna give them. So it's made me just even more aware of how like it's a continual reminder of the fact that this is a joyful, affirming process, and it's also can be a very frightening one. Like no matter whether you're doing it online, whether you're doing it with just with a few people that you know, like it is an inherently vulnerable process, and it just it keeps me in that headspace of just having like empathy for the fact that like whenever your identity shifts, like it can be a wonderful thing, but it's also like it's work and it does make you vulnerable. And I know a lot of readers are in that space. Like so many of us are in that space, whether it's because we're navigating the spaces where we're out and the spaces where we're not, or whether we don't feel safe coming out or don't want to come out, or whether we're having a shift in identity, and which can be difficult sometimes, especially if you're in this place where you feel like you need to like give your identity in little pieces. Like, okay, I just told people my pronouns, I can't tell them this yet. Like I have to give them a chance to like absorb that. I think it's a process that deserves space, and it's something I just have a heart for everyone who tells me that they're in that process or just in the process of figuring out, because it takes brain space, it takes heart space, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, and it's also work. So just love to anyone who's been there or is there.
You go, Ray.
Yeah, thinking about like my relationship to gender and how much it's changed in the like 5 years that I've been writing this book in earnest. I mean, like I had the idea more than 10 years ago when I first started questioning my gender, but it wasn't until like 2015-ish that I actually decided to like change my pronouns and change my name and start transitioning. Start like as if it's so linear. And I think Between Perfect and Real, I mean, it was like my companion on that journey. And I think that it is probably the only coming out or figuring out narrative that I will write, because now I feel like I'm in a place where I, got what I wanted out of medical transition. I'm happy socially. Like, I feel like very, fully myself, and it's not such a present part of my life anymore. And the characters that I'm starting to write in like my second YA and then like forthcoming like ideas are characters who are like just trans, like kind of like you're saying, Mason, like they just know, you know, what their identity is, and you know, attention is given to the places where it like maybe comes up in the narrative of like the characters like, oh, I need to go do my tea shot or whatever. But it's not like necessarily the focal point of the narrative. And then I think also like having become more secure in my gender, I feel less inclined to share it, oddly. Like the way that I share about it now is way different than I used to at the start of transition, where I was kind of like, I've always kind of been like an oversharer, but I was a little bit like, you know, just like putting a lot out there, trying to figure out who I was, trying to like, find people who could relate. And now I feel much more protective of like what I share and when and why and where. And so, yeah, I think that sums it up.
I definitely sympathize with that a lot, Ray, because like it seems as though the further in my identity journey that I go, and the more sort of reaffirmed I feel in not explicitly my gender identity, but how I identify with myself, the less inclined I am to share that with people, because I personally, I just feel like social media like has conditioned us to overshare in a way. But also like sometimes my business is just my business, and it's how I want to handle things. Like I have various thoughts about my own identity and my own transition that I hardly vocalize, even to the closest of friends. And I think that's where my writing comes in. Like with I Wish You All the Best, I was able to explore the coming out process, and sort of the way that Ben shares their identity with people around them and the impact of that. Whereas with The Ghost We Keep, I was able to write almost like a wish fulfillment type main character in Liam, with someone who has moments of dysphoria, like most trans people will, but otherwise they feel comfortable, not explicitly in their gender identity, but who they are as a person. And I think I almost wrote Liam as like a fake it till you make it, like wish fulfillment kind of character. And then in other projects that I've written since, like my third book is about a trans boy who still experiences dysphoria, and transphobia from his family. And because the book is a love story, there's also these moments where Neil maybe feels like he isn't the right type of guy for Wyatt. Like, is he guy enough? And that was my way of exploring this like masculine side of myself that I identify with at some points, and then others I don't. And then other ideas, like even a short story I wrote, that stars a trans girl, I was able to talk about like transness from that perspective and what it meant to her to see her body a certain way and how she imagined it before transition, before coming out. And that allowed me to explore feelings about my own body and how I saw it. And so I think that my writing mostly just takes on this form of exploration, and it's probably demented to think of it this way, but it's almost like The Sims, and instead of making yourself, you're kind of exploring your own identity with it. But yeah, I think that's mostly why I'm so grateful for my writing, is because it allows for these creations, like these entire worlds to take shape, and like I can explore so much about myself in them.
Yeah, like I think I like really vibe with like what all of you said, and like I feel like to a certain extent it's like the more I discover about my gender and the more I like explore gender, the more I want to like help other people explore gender, but also the less I want to personally disclose about my own gender to random strangers on the internet. So it kind of becomes like this balance of being like, well, now that I know more about me and now that I've gone on this journey, like I can write more stuff into my books and I can share more resources and I can bring up these like discussions. And kind of like the other day I was talking to a friend and I was like, so you want to question your gender, huh? Okay, so here are some thoughts. Like, here are some things. Like, are you feeling more like this or maybe more like that? How about like, and I feel like that's something I can do now that I like have gone on this journey and that I've, you know, made so many friends who are also on this journey. And so something that I'll do, like even on like social media, is I'll like, you know, talk. I'll have these discussions with people and I'll, you know, and I like to explore that in my books and give people like these metaphors and examples so they can kind of start to like build that relationship with those questions. But at the same time, I feel like people are kind of like, oh, so you write trans, like, tell me about your gender. And you're like, gender, like, I don't know. And I do feel like sometimes, I feel like it's funny too, because I feel like especially like, it's usually from like cis interviewers who will be like, so how does gender work? Like, how does this transness work? And you're like, because I feel like it's so different for all of us. And I think it's almost like the more I learn about myself, the more I'm like, I almost don't want to like put exactly what I'm feeling out there, because I also feel like on the one hand, I know people are going to like over scrutinize. But on the other hand, like, I don't want people to feel like because this is my like way of identifying, that's like a label you need to like put on yourself, or like, you're like, oh, well, because I felt this way, I use this label. Like, it doesn't mean you have to use that label. Like, it's just something that I feel comfortable with. And so I also think like, sometimes we get like held up as these like, you know, trans and non-binary role models. And it's like, okay, so if this person says this and that must be it. And it's like, no. Like, it's like gender is so deeply personal. And it's like, it's one of those things that like, I do feel like sometimes there's this expectation that I should like, you know, share all of that. Or like, you know, I've had people ask me like, how did you know you were trans? Or like, how did you know your gender? How did you know to use those? I have a lot of people, and I actually closed my DMs because of this. I used to get a lot of DMs on Twitter with people saying, so about your pronouns, why those? And like, I get the question like of like, you know, I'm thinking about pronouns, what should I do? But like, I can't tell you what pronouns to use or why. Like, I can't. And even like if I tell you my story, like, it's just like my reason for using these pronouns are not the reasons that like other people who use these pronouns use these pronouns. And so it does kind of, I do feel like almost the more I get into like this like gender thing, the more I'm like, okay, well, you know, I'm happy to talk to you about it in the abstract, but also like some things I kind of have to keep for myself. So we'll just kind of, you know.
Gender. Sorry, Ray, you go ahead.
I just say, like, I kind of thought that this, like, you know, so you want to question your gender thing really needs to be a TikTok. I can just see like a little point.
So you want to question? No, but like what Emery was saying, like, it's being trans and gender is such a shared experience, but also such a singular experience. Like there are lots of overarching feelings that I think a lot of trans people can describe as being similar, and yet at the same time we are each on such individual journeys at our own paces, figuring things out and trying on different things to see what fits best. And then it turns out, you know, years later we may even outgrow that thing that we spent years cultivating. It's bold of people to assume that even trans people know what is going on with gender, with trans. It's like, it's such like a crappy answer to give people, I feel like, but it's like, it really is just, you have to figure it out on your own. You have to figure out what works best for you. And like, people can help. And I think, you know, it's one reason why we're here and why we get so many emails from trans kids who are, you know, figuring things out or sharing news with us. But at a point, it really is just you, like, I can't tell you what to do. Like, you just have to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, and like even giving a label to something or like an explanation of something, it's like, if it works for me, that doesn't necessarily mean it will work for you.
Yeah. And like when I say like I don't make the rules, like it sounds like I'm making a joke, but I'm like, no, really, no one of us makes the rules. Like when I was talking about lipstick earlier, as a guy, I don't wear lipstick. That may change. Like when I'm more secure in like my masculinity, that may change. So none of us, like, expression wise or in any of the like trans FAQs, like, except for like honoring what people say about themselves, like honoring their pronouns, like honoring like what they tell you about themselves, like there aren't really, like, as much as I wish I could hand like the FAQ over to anybody who wants it, like that's really what it comes back to, like respect what people tell you and just respect people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, I think the more labels we learn, the more people are like, there has to be a perfect label that's just gonna like encompass everything I'm feeling. And it's like, the labels are just guidelines. Like, they're just like, we have a general gist. Like, the labels are like titles for the vibes. You know what I mean? Like, we just have like some general vibes. Like, if you got enough of these vibes, go for it. If not, you can pick a different label or something. Like, we're all just kind of here like, maybe like 25% this, 35% that. I'm bad at math, so everything I use ends in 5. But like, just that kind of like that gist. Like, I feel like, at the end of the day, it's like none of these things, like, that's like kind of like the whole thing about like being part of like the queer communities. It's kind of like, we don't really have the answers. We're all just kind of like going with whatever we feel like at the moment. And I feel like it changes so much, and like, even just like now, like I changed my pronouns on Twitter recently, and I feel like, even just like that, from like what pronouns I feel most comfortable with, like that can change overnight. And just like how I go about like expressing my gender. Like, before, if I was like, I'm a man, like, let me not wear any makeup. And now I'm like, the more manly I feel, the more makeup I wear. And it's just, it just is kind of, it's my expression, and that's just kind of the way it is. So, okay. So the last question I have for you all is, do you have any advice to any trans or non-binary readers or writers who are just getting started in this whole world of publishing?
I think just be true to like whatever is true for you, and know that you can't encompass the whole experience of being trans, or like a whole label of being trans, and just like write what's true for you. And trust that like somebody out there needs that particular one. Like, I think we've touched on this a little bit, but there's a lot of pressure in these like kind of early days of like on every book to be like representative for a ton of people, and that just isn't possible. And so I think people should just write like, from their heart and from their truth, and trust that someone's going to hear it and need it.
Piggybacking off of Ray, I think that truth is the most important. Like, not just truth, but like authenticity, which probably go hand in hand. But to me, they can read as two different things. Like, not to toot my own horn, but in a letter in the back of The Ghost We Keep, my favorite line from that letter is that I think that the best fiction is truth mixed with some lie. And I hold to that still, even though I just wrote the letter like a few months ago. But I do think fiction is like, I think it's best whenever it's your truth mixed with, obvious gives, name changes, stuff like that. I just think that like we, especially as a young writer, I remember being conditioned to follow just like any random advice that I saw on the internet from anyone ever. And I just like, no advice is universal. It's regurgitating the whole trans conversation, but just figure out what works for you. Like, it's taking me years to figure out that like how I work best is how I am working best now. And even between books that can change. So it really is just figuring out like what works best for you, and that you can read all the craft books you want, and I do suggest reading craft books because they can be helpful, but like there's no clear cut path to publication. Everywhere is going to be different. And so it's useless to compare yourself to other people, and it's useless to sort of meticulously follow like Stephen King's writing outline or whatever you want to, whatever is on your desk while you write.
I think I'd want to say you are allowed complexity, and so are your stories. I'm thinking of this especially because I'm in copy edits for Lakelore right now, and these are a couple of characters who are like, they're both Latinx, they're both brown, they're both non-binary, and they're both neurodivergent. So they're living in the space a lot of like, am I allowed to be this many things that seems to be hard for the people around me to understand sometimes. so I think that's why I'm thinking of it. Like, you are like your personal story, your personal identity is allowed to be complex. It's allowed to be complicated. It's allowed to be nuanced, and so are the stories you write.
Yeah, I think I would piggyback off of that too and say, every story is its own thing. Like you can read a book and really vibe with one thing in it, and you don't have to vibe with everything else. You can kind of just hold the part that you love close to your chest, and you can kind of, throw out the rest. And when it comes to your writing, like you can put as much or as little of yourself into it as you want to. You can put as much, personal experience and personal feelings, and that kind of stuff into a book. If you want to lay your entire heart bare on the page, like you can do that, but you can also say, I'm only going to give them this, or I don't feel comfortable sharing that. And like, that is absolutely something you're allowed to do. It's your book. And like, at the end of the day, like publishing has its standards of what it thinks is like marketable and like what it thinks is like, bestseller, like material and stuff. But like, at the end of the day, like books do so much better than publishing thinks they will, or they do like, so much worse. It's like, at the end of the day, like, you need to write for you and for, people to find a book that means something to them. And like, tune out the rest, just ignore it. Like your book will find its people, even if you feel like sometimes you're putting too much or too little of yourself into it. So that is the end of our panel for tonight. So would you all like to give one last pitch of your books, as well as tell people where they can find you?
I can start. Just like waiting. So Between Perfect and Real just came out. It's about a trans boy who's in the closet, but then is cast as Romeo in the school play, which sparks his coming out and transition. If you love theater and queer friendships and sort of like chosen family vibes and crying, this is for you. And you can buy it anywhere books are sold, but it would make me happiest if you bought from an independent bookstore. And you can find me at my website, raystovey.com, or on Twitter at Ray Stoeve, or on Instagram at James Rowan Ray, which is my first name and my two middle names reversed, in case you're wondering what the heck that's about.
I can go next. So my next book is The Ghost We Keep. It comes out June 1st. You can pre-order a book anywhere books are sold, but like Ray said, you should support independent bookstores. If you pre-order from Quail Ridge Books, you can get a personalized signed copy, comes with a postcard and a book plate. You can also get my first book, I Wish You All the Best, anywhere books are sold. It's out in paperback now, so super easy to get a hold of. And I am only on Instagram, thankfully. So there I'm just Mason_Deaver. My website is just Mason Deaver Writes, and you can email me masondeaverwrites@gmail.com if you have anything you want to say. I don't know.
Are we saying our names again? I forget if we're saying our names again.
Sure.
Okay. Hi, I'm Emery McLemore. My pronouns are they, them, and my most recent books are I'm not in frame, am I? The Mirror Season, which is a book of enchanted Pond Dulce, secret forests, and the power of red lipstick. And let's see if I can get. I'm not used to this going this way. Okay, yeah. Dark and Deepest Red, which is a reimagining of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Red Shoes, through the lens of the 1518 dancing plague. I too would be very appreciative if you've supported indies. You can find me online at AnnaMarieMcLemore.com or on Twitter at La Annamarie.
And I am Emery Lee, author of just released yesterday, Meet Cute Diary, the YA rom-com about a trans boy, his romance blog, and the fake relationship that he stages in order to save that blog from an internet troll. You can find me on Twitter. I am at Emery Lee Who. You can find me on Instagram. I am at Emery Lee Books, and you can find me on my website, which is emeryleebooks.com. If you would like to place an order for this book, You can obviously buy it anywhere, but I would highly recommend getting it from the Ripped Bodice because they should still have signed copies available. And they're just like the cutest bookstore, so support them. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate y'all being here. And be sure to check out all of our books and follow us all on social media. It has been great. It has been fun. And we will see you soon.
Bye.